Sophie was a simple and kind girl, studying fashion art in her final year of college. She always loved finding beauty in simple things, like a well-crafted dress or a peaceful afternoon walk. One day, as she was walking through a park, she noticed an elderly woman sitting on a bench, looking a little lost. Sophie felt drawn to help her, so she asked if the woman needed assistance. The elderly woman smiled and said, "I've dropped my glasses, dear. Could you help me find them?" Sophie kindly bent down and found the glasses, handing them to the woman. The woman thanked her and invited Sophie to have tea at her house. Sophie was surprised but agreed, feeling no harm in joining the stranger. They walked together to a beautiful mansion, where the woman introduced herself as Mrs. Devereux. Over tea, they chatted, and Sophie felt a calm connection with the kind woman. Mrs. Devereux was rich, but she had a humble, warm personality. She listened to Sophie's dreams of becoming a designer and starting her own fashion brand. Sophie felt comfortable talking to her, and Mrs. Devereux seemed genuinely interested. As the afternoon passed, Mrs. Devereux smiled and said, "You are a kind girl, Sophie. I would love to have you over for dinner tomorrow evening." Sophie was a bit nervous, but she agreed, curious about the older woman's invitation. She wasn't sure what to expect, but Mrs. Devereux made her feel at ease. She left with a sense of excitement, thinking that maybe this would be the beginning of a new friendship. The invitation was unexpected, but it felt right. Sophie couldn't wait to return the next day. Little did she know, this dinner would change her life in ways she never imagined. The next evening, Sophie arrived at Mrs. Devereux's mansion, feeling a little out of place in such an elegant home. Mrs. Devereux welcomed her warmly and led her to the dining room, where a handsome young man was already seated. He stood up when Sophie entered, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Lucas," he said with a soft, kind voice. Sophie felt a flutter in her chest as she shook his hand. Lucas was 2 years older than her, with dark hair, blue eyes, and a confidence that wasn't at all arrogant. They sat down to dinner, and Lucas seemed very easy to talk to. They shared stories about their lives, their dreams, and their hobbies, finding many things in common. Sophie felt an instant connection with him, something deeper than mere attraction. Mrs. Devereux, watching the two interact, smiled to herself, sensing that something special was happening between them. Sophie was surprised by how down-to-earth Lucas was, despite his obvious wealth. He talked about his family and how much he respected the values his grandmother had taught him. It was clear that Lucas wasn't the typical rich, spoiled man Sophie had expected. They laughed over dinner, and the evening passed faster than either of them had anticipated. After dinner, Mrs. Devereux suggested they take a walk in the garden. Lucas and Sophie strolled together, talking more about their passions and goals. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Sophie couldn't stop smiling, and Lucas seemed to enjoy her company just as much. As the evening came to a close, Mrs. Devereux gave them both a knowing smile, as if she had planned this all along. Sophie left feeling lighter, with a sense that she had just met someone truly special. Over the next few weeks, Sophie and Lucas spent more time together. They often went for walks in the park or visited local art galleries, where they would discuss everything from design to life itself. Their connection grew deeper, and Sophie found herself thinking about Lucas constantly. It wasn't just his good looks or wealth that attracted her, it was the way he treated her with respect and kindness. Lucas was always attentive, asking her about her day, her dreams, and her thoughts. Sophie felt like she could be herself around him, something that wasn't always easy for her to do. They began working together on a charity fashion event, where Sophie's designs would be showcased. Lucas helped her choose colors and fabrics, making suggestions that worked perfectly with her ideas. Their collaboration was seamless, and Sophie felt grateful for his support. As they spent more time together, Sophie began to realize that she was falling for Lucas. One evening, after a long day of work on their project, Lucas took Sophie out for coffee. They sat in a quiet cafe, and Lucas looked at her with a soft smile. "Sophie," he said, his voice gentle, "I really enjoy spending time with you. More than I expected." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "I feel the same way," she replied, her cheeks turning pink. Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "There's something about you," he said, "something that makes me feel like I've known you forever." Sophie smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. She had always been cautious about love, but with Lucas, everything felt natural. She was beginning to believe that maybe this was the beginning of something real. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, both lost in their thoughts about what might come next. That night, Sophie couldn't help but wonder if Lucas felt the same deep connection that she did. Not everyone was happy about the growing closeness between Sophie and Lucas. Charlotte, a wealthy and glamorous woman who had long been interested in Lucas, couldn't stand the idea of him being with someone like Sophie. She was used to getting what she wanted and believed Lucas was hers for the taking. When Charlotte heard about Sophie, she decided to make her move. At a fancy event, she approached Lucas, wearing a smile that didn't quite match her eyes. She flirted with him, trying to show him that she was the perfect match. But Lucas didn't seem interested, and that only made Charlotte more determined to win his attention. She then turned her attention to Mrs. Devereux, unaware of who she was. "You're looking quite old-fashioned tonight," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Mrs. Devereux, however, didn't flinch. "I may be old-fashioned, but I know what matters," she said calmly, her eyes sharp. "And respect is the most important thing of all." Charlotte didn't know how to respond to the older woman's words. She tried to laugh it off, but it was clear she had crossed a line. Lucas, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, walked over to Sophie and Mrs. Devereux. He gently took Sophie's hand and said, "I don't appreciate how you've treated my grandmother, Charlotte. If you can't respect her, then I don't think we should continue this conversation." Charlotte's face turned bright red as she realized her mistake. She tried to apologize but left the event shortly after, her pride hurt. Lucas turned to Sophie, squeezing her hand and giving her a reassuring smile. Sophie couldn't help but feel a wave of relief. Lucas had chosen her, and he was standing up for the people he cared about. After the incident with Charlotte, Sophie and Lucas grew even closer. They spent more time together, and Sophie began to realize just how much she loved being with him. They had both faced challenges in their lives, but together, they felt stronger. Sophie's confidence grew, and she felt supported in ways she hadn't before. Lucas was always there for her, encouraging her to follow her dreams. Her fashion designs were starting to get noticed, and she was on the verge of launching her own brand. Lucas promised to support her every step of the way, whether she succeeded or failed. Their love blossomed, built on trust, respect, and shared values. Lucas often told her that he admired how grounded and real she was. Sophie, in turn, admired how Lucas remained humble despite everything he had. Their bond felt unbreakable, and Sophie finally allowed herself to dream about a future with him. One day, Lucas took Sophie to the same cafe where they had shared their first quiet moment together. As they sat across from each other, he took her hand and smiled. "Sophie," he said, "I don't think I've ever been this sure of anything in my life. I want you by my side, now and always." Sophie's heart soared. "I want the same thing," she replied softly. Their fingers intertwined, and the world outside seemed to fade away. In that moment, they both knew that nothing could tear them apart. Sophie had found her soulmate in Lucas, and she felt incredibly lucky. They didn't need the approval of anyone else. They knew they were meant to be together. The future seemed brighter than ever, and Sophie couldn't wait to see where their love would take them. Sophie's fashion brand was growing quickly, and the hard work she had put into her designs was finally paying off. Major fashion houses began taking notice, and her work was displayed in prominent galleries. Despite the success, Sophie remained humble, never forgetting the roots of her passion. Lucas was by her side every step of the way, providing guidance and emotional support. He would often surprise her with thoughtful gestures, like bringing her favorite flowers after a long day. He had become not just her partner, but her best friend. Their bond had deepened into something even more profound, and Sophie felt incredibly grateful for him. The love they shared felt like a peaceful rhythm, something that came naturally and without effort. Lucas always knew the right thing to say when Sophie doubted herself. She couldn't imagine her life without him, and the thought of a future together seemed more real than ever. One evening, after a hectic week filled with meetings, Lucas invited Sophie to a quiet dinner at home. Sophie was tired, but the thought of spending a peaceful night with him sounded like the perfect way to unwind. They sat at a beautifully set table in the cozy dining room, the soft glow of candlelight flickering around them. Lucas smiled at her, his eyes filled with a warmth that always made her heart flutter. "Sophie, there's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said softly. Sophie put down her fork, sensing the seriousness in his voice. She looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "I want you to know how much you mean to me," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I love you, Sophie. More than I've ever loved anyone." Sophie's heart skipped a beat, and a rush of emotions flooded through her. Sophie smiled, her cheeks turning pink as she held his gaze. "I love you too, Lucas," she replied, her voice just above a whisper. It was the first time they had said those words aloud, and it felt like a milestone in their relationship. Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said, his voice unwavering. Sophie's eyes widened in surprise, her breath catching in her throat. She had always known they had something special, but hearing him say it made her heart swell. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Lucas nodded, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Yes, Sophie," he said. "I want to marry you." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes as she squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the love and joy she felt in that moment. Lucas then stood up and walked to a nearby cabinet, pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a stunning engagement ring, the diamond sparkling in the candlelight. Sophie gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. "Is this really happening?" Lucas knelt in front of her, taking her hand gently in his. "Sophie, will you marry me?" he asked, his voice filled with hope and love. Sophie's heart soared, and without a second thought, she nodded enthusiastically. "Yes," she said, her voice full of joy. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas slid the ring onto her finger, and they both sat there, caught in the magic of the moment. The evening turned into a celebration of love, and the two of them talked about their future. They dreamt of getting married in a small ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The thought of spending the rest of their lives together filled both of them with excitement and happiness. As they finished their dinner, Sophie couldn't stop staring at the ring, her heart still racing. "I never imagined this," she said, gazing at Lucas with a wide smile. "You've made me the happiest person in the world." Lucas kissed her forehead, whispering, "And I promise to make you happy every day for the rest of our lives." It was a moment Sophie would never forget, the start of a beautiful chapter in their love story. Sophie and Lucas' engagement was met with joy and excitement from their friends and families. Mrs. Devereux, who had been a guiding force in their relationship, was over the moon. She had always believed that Sophie and Lucas were meant to be together, and now, with the engagement, she couldn't be happier. Sophie's parents, though initially nervous about the idea of her marrying into such a wealthy family, soon warmed to Lucas's genuine character. They saw how much he cared for Sophie, and that was all that mattered. The couple began planning their wedding, and it was clear that their love for each other only deepened as the days passed. They chose a beautiful venue in the countryside, where they could marry in a serene and intimate setting. Sophie worked with a team of designers to create the perfect gown, her dream dress that would reflect both her personality and her love story with Lucas. Every detail was carefully chosen, and both Sophie and Lucas enjoyed the process of bringing their vision to life. The wedding day arrived faster than either of them could have imagined. Sophie stood in front of the mirror in her bridal suite, her heart pounding as she gazed at herself in the dress she had worked so hard to create. She felt beautiful, but it wasn't the gown that made her feel special. It was the love she felt for the man waiting for her at the altar. She thought back to the first time she met Lucas, how unexpected and perfect their relationship had turned out to be. She never thought she would fall in love with someone from such a different world, but now it felt like their differences were just another reason they were meant to be together. Her mother entered the room, tears in her eyes as she adjusted Sophie's veil. "You look stunning, darling," her mother said, her voice choked with emotion. Sophie smiled at her, feeling overwhelmed by the love and support from her family. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, squeezing her hand. She could hardly believe that this was her life, that she was about to marry Lucas. As Sophie walked down the aisle, she could see Lucas standing at the end, his eyes filled with love and admiration. He was dressed in a sharp suit, but it was his expression that took Sophie's breath away. It was as if the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them in this perfect moment. When she reached him, he took her hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are more beautiful than I ever imagined," he said, his words sincere and full of emotion. Sophie smiled, her heart swelling with love. "You make me feel like the luckiest woman alive," she replied, her voice shaking with joy. The ceremony was short but full of meaning, and when the time came for them to exchange vows, their promises to each other were heartfelt and genuine. "I promise to love you, to support you, and to grow with you," Lucas said, his voice strong and steady. Sophie nodded, her heart full as she said, "I promise to stand by your side through everything, to always be your partner, and to love you with all that I am." As the ceremony came to a close, they exchanged rings, and Lucas kissed Sophie gently, sealing their vows with a kiss. The crowd erupted in applause, and Sophie couldn't help but smile, feeling the warmth of their love fill the air. They were now husband and wife, and it felt like the beginning of an incredible journey together. The reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and joyful celebration. Mrs. Devereux looked on with pride, knowing that her vision for Sophie and Lucas had come true. The evening ended with fireworks lighting up the sky, symbolizing the start of their new life together. Months after their wedding, Sophie and Lucas settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They had their own routines, but every day felt like a new adventure. Sophie continued to work on her fashion brand, which had only grown since her marriage. Lucas, who had always been supportive of her work, was now her biggest cheerleader. He would visit her design studio, bringing her lunch and giving her encouragement when things felt overwhelming. Their love grew stronger each day, and they both found joy in the small moments they shared. Sophie often marveled at how perfect their life was, how she had gone from a simple girl with a dream to a successful designer, married to the love of her life. One evening, as they were sitting together on the couch, Lucas turned to Sophie with a serious look on his face. "Sophie, I've been thinking," he began, his tone thoughtful. "We've built such a beautiful life together, and I think it's time to take the next step." Sophie raised an eyebrow, intrigued by what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Lucas smiled gently, reaching for her hand. "I think we're ready for the next chapter," he said, "a chapter that involves more than just the two of us." Sophie's heart skipped a beat as she realized what he was implying. "Are you saying?" she began, her voice trailing off. Lucas nodded, his smile widening. "Yes, Sophie. I think it's time we start a family." Sophie's eyes filled with tears of joy as she realized that they were both ready to become parents. A few weeks later, Sophie found out she was pregnant. She couldn't believe it. This was a dream come true. She and Lucas were going to have a baby, and they couldn't wait to start this new chapter of their lives. They had always talked about building a family together, but the reality of it was even more exciting than they had imagined. Sophie spent the next few months preparing for the arrival of their child, while Lucas showered her with love and care. They decorated the nursery together, picking out colors and designs that would make it the perfect space for their little one. As the months passed, Sophie's excitement grew, and Lucas couldn't wait to be a father. They both knew that their love had created something even greater than they could have ever hoped for, a family. When the baby finally arrived, it was more beautiful than they could have ever imagined. Sophie held their newborn daughter in her arms, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "She's perfect," Lucas whispered, his voice full of awe as he kissed Sophie's forehead. Sophie looked at him, her heart full, knowing that their love had created something miraculous. Their family was complete, and Sophie knew that this was just the beginning of another beautiful chapter in their journey together.